Ah, how delightful it is to dip my quill once more into the inkwell of scandal. Yes, dearest gentle listener, Lady Whistledown is here again, returning with the most exquisite morsel to grace London's glittering gossip this season. I trust your nerves are steady and your tea sufficiently strong, for tonight's tale concerns not a waltz nor a duel, but something far rarer, a silence that has lasted 10 years. London has always been a city of sound, music spilling from gilded salons, whispers behind painted fans, the rustle of silk concealing 1,000 secrets. Yet amidst this endless chatter there exists one lady who has not uttered a word for 10 long years. A decade of silence, and not by cruel affliction, as the ton so kindly insists, but by deliberate choice. I speak, of course, of Lady Karina, a beauty of porcelain composure and unbroken calm, whose silence has become the orchestra's pause that London cannot ignore. They call her the mute Rose of Mayfair, a creature of pity and fascination. Mothers sigh that such a face should be wasted on a mind lost to quiet. Daughters envy the way her stillness commands attention without effort. Gentlemen, in their arrogance, mistake her silence for simplicity. How wrong they are. For though the ton believes her deaf to every cruel remark, every whispered jest, every proposal made in pity, Karina hears it all. Every syllable, every sigh, every false condolence offered in crowded drawing rooms has reached her ears with painful clarity. And through it all, she has kept her secret safe, a masquerade of silence so convincing that even her own family no longer remembers the sound of her laughter. They say silence protects the heart. But I wonder, my dearest listener, what becomes of a heart that has forgotten its own voice? One evening, at Lady Maria's grand charity musicale, London witnessed a most peculiar sight. Beneath a chandelier blazing with 100 candles, the cream of society gathered to display both virtue and vanity. The air was thick with perfume and gossip, the orchestra tuning strings that would soon waltz us into another evening of pretense. But then she appeared, Karina. The lady draped in soft dove-grey silk, her hair bound in silver ribbons, gliding toward the pianoforte. The murmurs stilled. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim in deference. She sat with unshaking grace, her gloved hands poised above the keys. When the first note sounded, it was as if her silence finally found a voice. Each chord trembled with restrained emotion, sorrow, defiance, longing, all without a single word. Among the crowd stood a man I must confess has lately drawn my quill's fascination. Derek, Duke of Kingswell. A widower of impeccable reputation and cold restraint, he has refused every offer of affection since his young wife's passing. The ton calls him noble. I, however, have often called him lonely. The Duke observed Lady Karina with an intensity most unfashionable for a man of his rank. His usual indifference melted, replaced by something far more dangerous. Curiosity. One could almost hear the crack of ice in his chest as her music unfolded. When her final note lingered and died, he did not applaud like the others. He simply looked at her as though he had heard his own heart for the first time in years. I confess I leaned forward in my chair. What did he see in that silent woman that no one else could? Was it the artistry of her hands, the melancholy that laced every note, or the mystery of eyes that promised she understood more than she ever revealed? After her performance, the Duke approached the hostess with a civility that could not conceal purpose. Within moments, he was standing beside Karina. Their meeting was a tableau fit for legend, the silent lady and the man who had forgotten how to speak of love. He bowed, she curtsied. The orchestra resumed, and society resumed its chatter, but I, your ever-faithful observer, saw what others missed. When the Duke spoke, Karina's gaze flickered, just slightly, just enough to betray understanding. He said something, low and careful, and though no sound escaped her lips, a faint, knowing smile curved her mouth. It was fleeting, scandalously intimate, and quite impossible to misinterpret. Did the Duke of Kingswell know her secret in that instant? Did he see that her silence was not of illness but of intent? Or did he merely sense a kindred solitude beneath her calm? The tongue will speak of this night for weeks, I assure you. Already the whispers have begun. Some claim the Duke means to patronise her cause, to support her charitable performances for the poor. Others murmur that the widower's heart has softened, that he seeks to rescue the pitiable Lady Karina from her lonely fate. But I, who have seen more hearts ruined by compassion than by cruelty, know that such pity is the first spark of ruinous desire. Imagine, dear listener, the man of ice meeting the woman of silence, he frozen by grief, she bound by deception. What melody might their hearts compose, should one dare to play the other's tune? I saw them once more as the evening waned. The candles burned low, the gossip dimmed to murmurs, and Karina prepared to depart. The Duke stood by the door, his gaze steady as she passed. She paused just briefly, enough for the slightest inclination of her head, a gesture not of gratitude but acknowledgement, a conversation in stillness that only they seemed to share. As her carriage rolled away into the mist, I swear the Duke lingered in the foyer long after the last guest had gone. Perhaps he listened for the echo of her music. Perhaps he listened for his own forgotten heart. 10 years, my dear listener. 10 years she has listened and not replied. 10 years she has survived by silence. Yet one evening in the presence of a man who does not flinch at quiet, and something within her stirs. A scandal begins, not with a kiss, nor a vow, but with a glance held too long beneath society's gaze. I have seen it before, the slow unravelling of propriety, the steady betrayal of self-control, the tremor that begins in the chest and ends in reputation's ruin. But never have I seen silence make so much noise. Karina's secret, so carefully kept, has found an audience she never intended. For when a Duke listens, London listens too. And so, as quills scratch and candles burn low across the city, every drawing room now hums with one singular question. Who is the lady who plays as if she weeps? And why does the Duke of Kingswell linger when she departs? Tell me, dear listener, if silence hides truth, what else might it conceal? If this little scandal has stolen your attention, do subscribe and tell me from which corner of the world are you listening tonight. Let us see just how far love and gossip travel across the globe. Ah, how swiftly one evening's glance can unravel a decade of carefully spun lies. Since that fateful musicale, my friend, London has found itself consumed by the mystery of Lady Karina and the Duke of Kingswell. I dare say even my ink has not cooled since. But before we drown ourselves in the present scandal, permit me to lift the curtain on the past, where deception first found its voice, and silence became a lady's salvation. 10 years ago, the name Karina was whispered not with pity but envy. She was her father's pride, her mother's ornament, and society's darling debutante. Her laugh, yes, she once had one, was said to be bright enough to make even the dullest suitor forget his debts. Yet beneath the pearls and polished waltzes, ruin loomed. Her father, a viscount of considerable charm and questionable restraint, gambled away more than coin. He wagered reputation, honour, and at last his daughter's hand. It was whispered that he struck a bargain with an ageing baron, 3 decades her senior, twice widowed and notoriously cruel, to settle a debt that would have otherwise ended in prison. Karina learned of it on a moonless night when she overheard her father's desperate plea. He had spoken the words no daughter should ever hear. She will obey. She must. That night, silence was born. The morning after, she collapsed at breakfast, hands pressed to her ears, claiming that grief had stolen her hearing. The physicians came and went, shaking their heads with pity. Her father, frantic and guilt-ridden, withdrew the engagement. London buzzed with sympathy. Pity replaced scandal, and her virtue was preserved. From that moment forward, Karina's world became a pantomime of gestures and smiles, her silence the fortress that saved her from being bartered away again. But what is safety, dear listener, without freedom? For 10 long years she has played the part of the deaf and dutiful daughter, moving through salons and soirees like a ghost draped in silk. Suitors vanished, invitations dwindled. The ton loves a fragile beauty, but it does not love one who cannot laugh at its jokes. Still she endured. Better silence than servitude. And now, in her 29th year, just as whispers of spinsterhood began to bloom, fate sent her a man she could not ignore. Derek, Duke of Kingswell, a name spoken with reverence in drawing rooms and with longing in boudoir. But if Karina's silence is her mask, his composure is his chain. 5 years ago, his betrothed, a woman of grace and good fortune, met a tragic end. A fall from a horse, some say. Others claim it was despair that drove her to recklessness. Yet the Duke never corrected the rumours. He merely withdrew from society, his heart sealed tighter than any vault in the Crown Bank. Those who remember him from his youth speak of laughter once quick to rise, of music in his halls and merriment in his eyes. Now, he walks among us with the air of a man who mourns more than a woman. He mourns the man he used to be. He has taken no lovers. No one has dared to approach him since. Until that night, when a silent lady played the pianoforte as if she, too, understood what it meant to lose everything and say nothing. Since the musicale, my sources inform me the Duke has made several quiet inquiries into Lady Karina's circumstances. A charitable impulse, perhaps? Or something more dangerous, the curiosity of one wounded soul drawn toward another. Society, of course, pretends to approve. How noble of him, they sigh. The Duke shows such compassion. But make no mistake, my dear, compassion is merely scandal in its infancy. Now imagine them side by side, he with his grief pressed neatly beneath a waistcoat, she with her truth buried behind a smile. London calls them opposites. I call them mirrors, both shaped by loss, both prisoners of their own making. He hides behind duty, she behind deception, and together they are bound by the exquisite loneliness that only the fallen understand. When the Duke visited Lady Mireia the following week, it was ostensibly to discuss donations for the orphanage fund. Yet somehow Lady Karina was there, seated near the window, embroidery in hand, her eyes raised just enough to meet his. He bowed, she inclined her head. The air between them trembled with everything unsaid. He spoke with deliberate clarity, as one does when addressing the deaf. "Your performance was remarkable, Lady Karina," he said. His voice was softer than the ton imagined, a baritone worn by loss. She smiled faintly, fingers tightening around her thread. She gestured gratitude. Her movements were graceful, but her pulse, oh, if you had seen it, betrayed her. A heartbeat too quick, a breath too sharp. For though she has mastered silence, she has not mastered indifference. When he took his leave, his gloved hand brushed hers, accidentally one might claim. Yet I have always mistrusted accidents that last more than a second. Her gaze lifted, startled, and in that stolen instant, something passed between them that neither the tongue nor I could fully name. Recognition, perhaps. Or the ache of two people who have carried grief so long it begins to look like peace. Later that evening, I overheard two dowagers at White's murmuring that the Duke had smiled for the first time in years. A fleeting, genuine smile. And all because of a woman who cannot hear him. Or so he believes. How fascinating, is it not, dear listener, that she who pretends not to hear has finally been heard? And he who listens to nothing now listens to her silence as if it were music. The ton, of course, will never understand such subtleties. They prefer their romances loud and their scandals louder. They will call this pairing a curiosity, a kindness, perhaps even a charity. But I, who know the quiet corners of hearts better than most, recognise the truth. The Duke of Kingswell does not see a helpless lady, he sees an echo of himself. He too hides behind perfection. He too fears the cost of honesty. And yet, when his eyes follow her across the room, his expression softens in a way that cannot be explained by pity alone. Ah, my quill trembles to write it. London may soon witness a miracle rarer than virtue itself. Affection born not of admiration, but of understanding. For Karina's silence speaks the language Derek's heart remembers. Her lies sing the melody his grief forgot. And though society may never forgive deceit, the heart, I assure you, forgives everything when it is lonely enough. Perhaps only the wounded can hear the music of another's quiet heart. London's glittering facade has once again cracked, and beneath its gilded laughter, I have found the sweetest sin of all. The moment when deception stumbles upon desire. The night in question? Lady Maria's masquerade, where silk concealed more than faces, and the orchestra's waltz could not drown the heartbeat of truth. I confess, there are few entertainments I adore more than a masquerade. Where else may one hide behind lace and still be seen so clearly? The ladies shimmered in pearls, the gentlemen strutted in arrogance, and every whisper that passed beneath those gilded masks was worth a paragraph in my next paper. But of all the faces that night, none burned brighter in memory than two: the Duke of Kingswell and the lady London believes cannot hear his name. Karina arrived late, as all women certain of their invisibility often do. Dressed in twilight blue, her mask a delicate arrangement of silver leaves, she glided through the candlelight as though untouched by it. The musicians struck a lively measure, laughter rose, and there, amid the chaos, she laughed. Softly, unguardedly, with a joy so unfeigned it startled even herself. Ah, my people, I heard it. And so did he. From across the ballroom, the Duke turned. It was the kind of movement that draws every gaze, though it is meant for one alone, deliberate, sharp, predatory in its precision. His eyes found hers through the sea of masks, and I swear even the violins lost their tune. Karina's hand flew to her lips too late. The sound had escaped, her secret betrayed by one instant of happiness. He crossed the room without hesitation, parting the crowd like a storm through silk. Politeness demanded he bow, curiosity demanded he speak. "You laugh most beautifully, Lady Karina," he said. His tone was low, courteous, and yet laced with something perilously close to accusation. Karina froze, caught between denial and panic. Her fingers, so skilled at the graceful art of feigned gestures, trembled against her gown. She mouthed a polite apology, feigning ignorance, but the Duke's eyes held her fast. In them she read the truth. He knew, or at least suspected. Their dance followed, as all disasters do, with elegance. He offered his hand, and to refuse would have been to invite gossip far crueler than she could endure. So she accepted, and the orchestra, obliging in its cruelty, began a waltz. Imagine the sight, dear listener, a woman who must pretend she cannot hear, dancing with a man who refuses to speak what he knows. Each step was a question, each breath a confession neither dared make aloud. His hand rested upon her waist, not possessive, but searching. Hers trembled against his shoulder, uncertain whether to flee or to linger. He leaned close, far too close for propriety, and murmured, "If I were deaf, I would envy the man who could hear your laughter." She flinched. The line of her throat shone in the candlelight, pale with fear, flushed with something else entirely. She could not reply, not with words, and so she turned her face away, a silent denial that fooled no one. The Duke smiled, the faint, dangerous kind that promises pursuit rather than retreat. When the waltz ended, he did not release her hand immediately. A heartbeat too long, a silence too charged, and the ton had found its evening's entertainment. Fans fluttered like startled birds. Eyes darted behind feathers and lace. I, your devoted chronicler, watched every delicious moment unfold. By midnight, the whispers had begun their predictable waltz of exaggeration. Some claimed the Duke was enchanted, that pity for the poor deaf lady had softened his iron heart. Others swore she had bewitched him with her gaze. The truth, as always, is far more perilous. It was not pity that held him. It was fascination, that intoxicating recognition when one wounded soul glimpses another's disguise. I followed them to the terrace, where the night air was thick with jasmine and speculation. They stood apart, silhouettes against the moonlit balustrade. No witnesses save my own watchful eye. The Duke spoke softly, his words nearly lost in the hush of the garden. I find myself wondering, he said, what other music you might hear when no one is listening. Karina's mask quivered in her grasp. She turned as though to leave, but he stepped closer. Not a threat, no, an invitation. Do not be afraid, Lady Karina, he murmured. Secrets are safe with me. But are they ever, dear listener? For secrets are my very profession. She curtsied, a perfect performance, but her eyes glistened with tears she could not hide. He, honourable fool that he is, pretended not to notice. Yet I saw it, the flicker of guilt, the spark of desire, the promise of ruin born in a single heartbeat. When they re-entered the ballroom, they might as well have carried a torch. Every glance followed them. Every fan trembled with excitement. The Duke, ever composed, escorted her to her chaperone with impeccable courtesy, yet his gaze lingered even as he bowed his farewell. And so, the whispers deepened, multiplying like ivy around a scandal's walls. Why does the Duke of Kingswell, that model of restraint, spend so much attention upon a woman who cannot even hear his compliments? Why, indeed, does he look at her as though she were the only sound in the room? By morning, London had already chosen its side. Some call it compassion. Others call it folly. But I, ever the realist, call it what it is, the beginning of a most delicious catastrophe. For every glance he gives her now will be examined, every silence she keeps will be questioned. The Tarn adores nothing more than a riddle wrapped in virtue. And the Duke, heaven help him, has handed them both the riddle and the answer. Remember, dear listener, reputations in London do not crumble overnight. They erode in candlelight and bloom under gossip's breath. Already invitations have doubled for the next assembly. Karina will attend, of course, her mother insists. And the Duke? He will come because he cannot resist. Mark my words, before this season ends, that single laugh, innocent, accidental, unguarded, will echo through every ballroom from Mayfair to Hyde Park. The Duke's eyes spoke what his lips dared not, and the lady, deaf or not, heard every word. How curious, my dearest listeners, that silence, once a shield, can so swiftly become a siren's song. It began innocently enough. A series of polite visits, the kind that London pretends are harmless, when in truth they are invitations to ruin wrapped in tea and civility. Yet we all know how swiftly civility burns when two hearts begin to smoulder. The Duke of Kingswell, ever the model of restraint, has developed what the ton now calls a charitable interest in Lady Karina. Such noble phrasing, of course, hides the truth. He visits her not out of pity but fascination. His eyes, that unyielding shade of winter gold, soften each time they meet her quiet gaze. He claims it is curiosity, a wish to better communicate with the lady who cannot hear. But the way he lingers, the way his hand hovers just a breath too close when she writes upon her little slate, betrays far more dangerous intent. Last week, I am told, he commissioned a tutor in sign language, an act that sent the matrons of Mayfair into fits of sentimental admiration. Imagine, the Duke himself, a man too proud to dance twice with the same woman, now learning the delicate gestures of the silent tongue. Every afternoon he practices at her side beneath the carved ceilings of Kingswell House, their lessons more like a conversation between souls than a scholarly pursuit. He gestures slowly, earnestly, his brow furrowed in concentration as he signs. "How are you today?" She answers with a faint smile, her fingers trembling as they reply, "Well, my lord. And you?" In truth, the words are clumsy, but the silence that follows is eloquent beyond measure. Each shared glance lingers too long, each movement becomes its own confession. He leans forward when she hesitates, his breath stirring the loose strands of hair at her temple. She looks away before he can see the truth flickering behind her lashes, that she understands every word he speaks and far too many of the ones he does not. Ah, but love, my dear listeners, has no respect for rules or reason. It creeps through cracks of guilt, and grows in the shadows of deceit. Lady Karina, whose deception once spared her from a wretched fate, now finds herself bound by it. She cannot end the masquerade without unravelling the fragile affection that has begun to bloom between them. And yet, each time she sees his tenderness, each time he signs another careful phrase, her conscience twists like a knife. There are moments, whispered by those who observe them too closely, when it seems she might confess all, when his hand brushes hers and her lips part, trembling with the truth. But then, the weight of her past, her father's scandal, her years of falsehood, presses against her chest, and she remains mute, her heart screaming in a silence of its own making. The Duke, meanwhile, has become something of a changed man. His once cold demeanour softens. At gatherings, he no longer stands aloof by the brandy table, but instead watches the door for her arrival. His smile, so rarely seen since his fiancée's tragic death, returns in fleeting, fragile glimmers. When Karina enters, he straightens unconsciously, as though her presence commands his very breath. They are often seen walking together in the rose gardens of Kingswell, where moonlight paints the marble fountains in silver and shadow. There, they need no words at all. She gestures lightly, he follows with ease. A laugh escapes him now and then, low, startled, utterly human. London pretends not to notice, but its curiosity is merciless. The whispers bloom like spring roses. The Duke of Kingswell smiles again. But for whom? Karina, meanwhile, lives in torment. For the first time, she wishes her lie were truth. If she were truly deaf, her silence would at least be honest. Her guilt swells each time his kindness meets her eyes, each time he bends nearer to show her another phrase, each time his fingertips accidentally brush hers and linger a moment too long. She lies awake at night, replaying those touches, those looks, until the ache in her chest feels like prayer and punishment all at once. Her maid reports that the lady has begun practicing her deception even in solitude, walking her chambers with her ears covered, her lips still, her heart whispering confessions to a God she no longer dares to face. But, dear listeners, what I find most deliciously tragic is that the Duke himself has begun to abandon propriety. One evening, he insisted she join him for a carriage ride through Hyde Park. A scandalous liberty, indeed, though the excuse was unimpeachable. He wished to show her the lanterns lit in honour of the Queen's birthday. The city glowed gold against the night sky, and there they sat, side by side, her gloved hand inches from his, the sound of hooves drowned by the louder silence between them. She looked out the window, trying to appear calm, but he studied her instead. The soft line of her jaw, the sadness she tried so hard to conceal. And then, in a moment of reckless impulse, he reached for her hand. She did not pull away. The carriage slowed. Neither spoke. He traced a single letter upon her palm, D. She turned, startled, and he smiled faintly, continuing the gesture. Derek. His name, written not in sound but in touch. She closed her hand over his and replied with her own trembling strokes upon his skin. Karina. There are no witnesses who can describe what followed, but I imagine silence held its breath as the night itself leaned closer. Perhaps they did not kiss. Perhaps they did not need to. For intimacy, my gentle listeners, is not always born of touch. It is born of understanding. Still, let us not mistake tenderness for safety. This affection, sweet as it seems, is a blade in disguise. For every gesture draws her deeper into the lie she must someday destroy. Every shared look, every stolen moment, builds a castle upon sand. And when the truth comes, as truth always does, it will collapse beneath the weight of its own beauty. I suspect, though, that neither of them cares to think so far ahead. Not when her smile sets his heart alight, not when his gaze makes her forget she ever meant to hide. And so they continue their dangerous dance, his devotion sharpening her guilt, her silence feeding his yearning. London calls it courtship. I call it quiet rebellion. For what is love, if not the most exquisite defiance of all? There is nothing so dangerous as a woman whose silence makes men imagine virtue, or a man whose kindness tempts her to speak. Tell me then, dear listener, would you guard your honour or follow your heart? Kingswell House had long been known for its music, not for the melodies played within, but for the silence that followed them. Yet one moonlit evening, that silence fractured. The Duchess of Merrow's musicale had ended hours ago. Guests had departed, laughter trailing into the misted streets. Only two souls remained in the drawing room: Lady Karina, seated at the pianoforte, and the Duke himself, who had returned from escorting his mother home. She often came for these private lessons, the pretext being his effort to teach her the language of signs. A noble pastime, the tonne whispered, for a man too melancholic for courtship, and a woman too pitiable for scandal. But that night, when Derek paused outside the door, he heard something that froze his blood. A sound, a hum, low, uncertain, but unmistakable, the sort of tune one only hums when no one else is meant to hear. He pushed the door open an inch. There she was, Lady Karina, bathed in candlelight, her lips curved in quiet reverie as her fingers traced the piano keys. Her voice, delicate, real, filled the still air. He stepped inside before he could think better of it. The candle flickered, startled by his shadow. Karina turned, her face blanching. The hum died. He stood in the doorway, hands at his sides, not as an accuser, but as a man whose heart had just learned how easily love could deceive. "You can hear," he said softly. No anger, no outrage, only sorrow, spoken like a prayer he wished were false. Karina rose to her feet, every inch of poise trembling. "My lord." He took one slow step forward. "How long?" The question sliced the air between them, cold and merciless. 10 years, she whispered, "since my father's ruin, since my mother tried to barter my silence for safety." Her eyes shimmered. "I was to marry a man 3 times my age. Pretending to be deaf was the only way to stop it." The Duke exhaled sharply, a sound of disbelief and pity intertwined. "You deceived them all," he murmured, as though speaking to himself. She nodded, voice breaking. "Yes, but I deceive myself most of all." She told him everything, of her father's debts, her mother's desperate schemes, the endless pity of the tonne, how silence had become her only refuge. "Would you have pitied me too?" she asked at last. His reply came rough, raw, stripped of every layer of nobility. "No, I would have understood." The fire crackled, painting them both in gold and shadow. And yet the revelation twisted like a thorn inside him. Every gentle look, every stolen moment now glittered with a cruel new meaning. Had her shy smiles been real? Had his kindness been a game to her? "Why me?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "Why tell me?" "Because you were kind," she said, stepping forward, "and I wanted to believe your kindness was not built on a lie." He turned from her, his jaw tight with restraint. "You think this truth will free you?" Her lips trembled. "No, but it frees me from myself." The clock struck midnight, the sound vast in the quiet room. For a long moment neither moved. Then he spoke again, his tone gentler, but no less pained. "You could have trusted me, Karina." "I wanted to," she breathed. "But by then, I didn't know how." He faced her fully, and for the first time she saw tears glinting in his eyes. "You've made me doubt silence itself." She reached out, hesitant. "Then let me teach you something truer. Forgiveness." The words trembled between them. He caught her hand, not to hold it, but to stop it. His touch was both tender and terrified. "You ask for what I may not possess." Her gaze softened. "Then perhaps I shall pray you find it." He released her hand. "And if I cannot, then I shall forgive you instead." That simple promise struck him harder than any confession. He stepped back, the motion heavy with meaning. "You've condemned us both," he whispered. Karina's voice cracked. Then let the condemnation be mine alone. Outside, thunder murmured low, as if the heavens themselves had overheard. The Duke bowed his head. You should go, my lady. She hesitated, one heartbeat too, then curtsied with quiet dignity. As she reached the door, she turned once more, her voice barely audible. You were the first man who ever looked at me and saw something worth listening to. And then she was gone. He stood alone in the candlelight, her confession echoing through every corner of his heart. By morning, whispers would dance through every drawing room in London, the lady who could hear, the Duke who chose to listen. And I, Lady Whistledown, sharpen my quill with a single reminder. Confession may cleanse the soul, but it also ruins the reputation. Scandal, my dear listener, has no need of witnesses, only servants with sharp ears and slower consciences. It began at Kingswell House, the night Karina's trembling confession shattered the fragile peace between her and the Duke. Unseen in the corridor, a maid lingered beyond the threshold, gathering discarded gloves and courage in equal measure. She heard enough, a broken whisper, a single phrase that would echo through all of London. I pretended to be deaf. By morning, that whisper had found wings. The maid told a footman, who repeated it to the butler's niece, who happened to work for the Duchess of Kingswell. By afternoon tea, the story was trimmed and polished into perfection. The Duke had been deceived by his own charitable protégé. 10 years of lies, 10 years of scandal, dressed as innocence. Thus, without malice but with exquisite efficiency, the Ton learned what should have died in silence. Karina's world collapsed before she had time to draw breath. Invitations vanished, as though her name had been erased from every guest list in London. The grand doors of Mayfair that had once opened with sympathy now shut without so much as a bow. At Lady Mireille's garden party, whispers rippled faster than the wind. Can you imagine? One debutante gasped, pretending all those years, just to avoid marriage. Deplorable, her companion agreed, though her eyes glittered with the thrill of forbidden delight. And in that instant, Karina ceased to be a woman. She became a tale to be told between mouthfuls of cake and sips of scandal. Her mother bore the humiliation with brittle grace until the gossips reached her doorstep. You've doomed us all, she said through trembling lips, her once proud posture bowed by shame. We were meant to rise again through your quiet virtue, not sink deeper through deceit. Karina tried to explain that she had lied only to survive, to escape a cruel fate. But words once mistrusted carry no salvation. Meanwhile, Derek faced his own reckoning among men who called themselves gentlemen. The club at St. James's buzzed with mockery cloaked in civility. I warned you, Kingswell, drawled Lord Terence, swirling his brandy. Never mistake pity for affection. Women like her prey on sympathy. Still, added another with false concern, one must admire her cunning, deftness, ingenious disguise for ambition. Derek said nothing. His knuckles whitened around his glass, the polished surface reflecting a face he scarcely recognized. The word liar burned in his ears, though not for her, for himself. He had promised to protect her, and now his silence had destroyed her more completely than any accusation could. By evening his mother confronted him. The Duchess of Kingswell, proud even in heartbreak, stood by the fireplace, her pearls trembling against her throat. You must end this madness, Derek, she declared. A duke cannot entangle himself with deceit. You will cut all ties before the family name becomes a jest. He lifted his gaze to hers, tired, resolute, and unbearably gentle. If I abandon her, she has no one. If you stay, she replied sharply, she becomes your ruin. Choose wisely. The fire crackled between them, devouring what was left of his peace. That night he wrote a letter with steady hand and breaking heart. You must leave London, Karina. Let the blame rest with me. I can bear it. You must not. Your courage deserves a quieter world than this." He sealed it, knowing the ink would bleed before the tears dried. When the letter arrived, Karina read it in her dim parlour, the candlelight trembling across her pale face. Her mother slept in the next room, exhausted by humiliation, while outside the sound of carriage wheels carried the laughter of those who had turned her into a story. She pressed the Duke's letter to her chest, the words sinking like stones. Leave. And so, she did. Before dawn, she packed her life into a single trunk, plain dresses, a broken music book, and the memory of a man who had once looked at her as if silence were sacred. She took the back road to Sussex, where the sea could drown out the noise of the world. The journey was long and cruel. Each mile carried her farther from what little she had left. Her hands, once graceful upon piano keys, now trembled beneath the chill air seeping through the carriage. She watched the countryside blur by, a painted world to which she no longer belonged. When she reached the small coastal cottage her father had once leased, she dismissed the driver and stood alone in the wind. The scent of salt clung to her hair, the gulls cried above as though mourning with her. Inside, the walls held only silence, the kind she had once feigned, now finally earned. She lit a fire, its warmth flickering weakly against the gloom, and whispered, "This is what I deserve." In London, Derek endured his own exile. Every corner of Kingswell House carried her ghost, the faint perfume lingering near the pianoforte, the half-folded kerchief she had once left upon the garden bench. Servants avoided his gaze, afraid of what sorrow might demand of them. His peers praised his restraint, commending his sense of duty. A duke must rise above scandal. But in private, his reflection condemned him for cowardice. He had saved her reputation, yes, by sacrificing her heart, and in doing so, he had lost his own. Rain fell for days over the city, drumming against his windows like the unending murmur of gossip. At last, even Whistledown herself set down her quill in grief. "The Tarn adores tragedy," I wrote in my latest paper, "provided it happens to someone else. They feast on ruin as others feast on sweets, forgetting that every scandal once had a beating heart beneath its silken sin. And thus 2 hearts, one banished by shame, one bound by honour, learned the same cruel truth. Silence, when chosen for survival, becomes a cage when love is left inside it." For the first time in 10 years, Karina no longer pretended to be deaf, and Derek of Kingswell no longer pretended to be whole. Rain had long since ceased in London, yet in the heart of the Duke of Kingswell, the storm endured. For weeks Derek lived like a man half buried, his title intact, his soul in ruin. His mother believed silence to be strength. His peers called his restraint noble, but none knew that every breath without Karina scraped like penance. Letters unanswered, doors closed. No trace of her remained save the faint memory of her voice, a sound that had never truly existed, yet haunted him all the same. At last he sent for his steward. "Find her," he said, his tone low and final. "Every carriage driver, every posting inn, every cottage in Sussex that bears the name Ainsley, search them all." The steward hesitated. "My lord, the ton will—" "The ton," Derek interrupted, "will do as it always does. Gossip, then forget. But I will not forget." Thus began the quietest pursuit London had never seen, not a duke's conquest, but a man's confession carried by horse and rain. It was 3 weeks before word returned. A carriage driver remembered a woman travelling alone to the coast, her trunk unmarked, her eyes hollow with sorrow. She had paid in full and refused to leave a name. Derek left before dawn. The road to Sussex was sodden and cold, the air thick with salt as he neared the cliffs. By the time Kingswell's crest appeared faintly upon the horizon, his coat was soaked through, his gloves stained with mud. Yet he pressed on, driven by something neither duty nor desire, only the unbearable need to atone. The cottage was smaller than he imagined. A weather-beaten roof, a crooked chimney, and a single window glowing with firelight. Through it he saw her, seated by the hearth, mending a torn shawl. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders, the candlelight painting her in gold. For a moment, he could only watch. Then he knocked. The sound startled her. She rose slowly, uncertain, her hand brushing the door before pulling it open. When she saw him, colour drained from her face. "Your Grace," she whispered, her voice soft from disuse. "You should not be here." He removed his gloves, his gaze never wavering. "I have nowhere else to be." Karina turned away, her composure trembling. "London will not forgive you for this." "London," he said, stepping inside, "has already condemned me for less." For a heartbeat, only the crackle of the fire filled the space between them. Then he spoke again, the words low and raw. "I came to say what pride would not let me before, that I cannot find peace without you." She stiffened, her hands tightening around the shawl. "Do not say such things out of guilt. This is not guilt." His voice broke on the truth. "This is confession." Her eyes lifted to his, shimmering with disbelief. "I tried to bury you beneath duty," he continued, "to convince myself I did right by letting you go, but every day since, I have heard your silence louder than the tongue's gossip." Karina pressed a trembling hand to her lips, as if to keep her heart from escaping through them. "And now? You would have me return to the city that mocked my name?" He moved closer, but stopped within reach, unwilling to trap her again. "No," he said, "I would have you return to me." Her breath caught. For a long moment the firelight danced between them, the flicker of everything they had been and everything they had lost. Then, at last, she spoke. Her real voice. Not the hushed, measured tones of a woman pretending weakness, but the trembling, beautiful sound of one reclaiming truth. "I feared this world all my life," she said. "Feared its judgment, its cruelty, its endless watching eyes. I hid behind silence because it was safer than being seen." She stepped forward, each word steadying her strength. "But I no longer fear the world's judgment, Derek. Only the loss of you." Her name on his lips was a vow. Karina. And then for the first time since the night of her confession, he touched her, not as a duke claiming what was his, but as a man kneeling before what he never deserved. His gloved hand brushed hers, trembling. "If you can forgive me, I will ask for nothing else." Her answer was simple, and it broke him. "Then ask." He sank to one knee before her, not in ceremony but surrender. The firelight caught the edge of his face, revealing something rare, humility wrapped in devotion. "I am not here as a duke," he said quietly. "I am here as a man who has spent every waking hour wishing he had been braver when it mattered." Her tears fell silently, but her smile trembled through them. "You are brave now." He bowed his head, voice barely a whisper. "Then let me prove it." She reached out, her fingers brushing his jaw, tentative, tender. "You already have." For a moment the storm within them stilled. Outside the wind softened. The sea, once restless, seemed to hold its breath. Karina closed the distance between them, her hand resting over his heart. "I do not need London's forgiveness," she said softly. "Only yours." Derek looked at her as though seeing sunlight for the first time after a long winter. "You have it. Entirely. Always." When she smiled, it was like dawn breaking through years of shadow. He rose, their hands entwined, the fire warming what neither society nor scandal could extinguish. "And I, Lady Whistledown, will admit, though my quill thrives on misfortune, even I smiled that night when love triumphed over pride. For indeed, even a duke must kneel when love commands." Ah, dear listener, the tongue adores a scandal, but it adores a spectacle of redemption far more. And what greater entertainment could London demand than the resurrection of a duke's fallen honour, performed before the very eyes that once condemned him? The invitation arrived gilded and ominous. The annual ball at Buckingham House, attendance required of all noble houses. It was, of course, not an invitation at all, but a summons. The Queen's Council intended to remind the errant Duke of Kingswell of his place, if not through reprimand, then through humiliation. Yet Derek did not flinch. For once, his title felt like armour rather than a cage. And beside him, radiant in pale blue silk trimmed with moonlight, Karina stood, not as a penitent, not as a scandal, but as the woman he refused to lose again. When they entered the great hall, conversation fell like petals cut from the stem. The chandeliers shimmered above in cruel brilliance, the orchestra faltered, and I, pen in hand, felt London itself hold its breath. "By the saints," whispered one dowager, "he dares to bring her." And before the Queen's Council, another hissed, "Does he wish for exile?" But Derek walked forward with the calm of a man who had already faced ruin and found peace in the ashes. His hand rested lightly at the small of Karina's back, not possessive, but protective, and the crowd parted before them like the Red Sea before destiny. At the dais, the Queen's Council awaited, their expressions carved in marble. Lord Terence, that perennial hound of gossip, spoke first. "Your Grace," he drawled, voice echoing beneath the vaulted ceiling. "London still whispers of the lady's invention. You have chosen to appear with her, though her deception brought dishonour to your name. Do you intend to deny the charge?" Derek's jaw set. He could have bowed, he could have apologised, soothed, deflected, but pride, once his master, now bowed to love instead. He stepped forward, voice carrying clear and unshaken. "I do not deny it." The room erupted with gasps and murmurs. A fan snapped in half. Someone's wine spilled in shock. "I do not deny it," he repeated louder now. "Karina Ainsley deceived London, yes, but she did so not for gain, nor malice, but survival." He turned, his gaze sweeping across the glittering crowd, the same faces that had watched her fall. She was a young woman cornered by cruelty. She feigned silence because the world gave her no safe words to speak. And I... His voice wavered, then steadied with quiet fire. "I loved her for the peace she brought into my home, never once wondering how much fear she carried to bring it there." Every word cut deeper than scandal, because it was truth, simple, human, and unbearably raw. A murmur rippled through the hall. The Queen's fan paused mid-air, and still Derek spoke on. "A lie born of survival," he declared, "is not deceit, but desperation." He turned then, facing her fully, his voice softening to something that made even my ink tremble. "And if London wishes to call her a liar, let them call me one too, for I lied every day I lived without her." A hush fell so complete, it silenced the orchestra. Only Karina's breathing could be heard, the quick, trembling rhythm of disbelief and love colliding all at once. He reached for her hand. "Karina," he said, his tone rich with reverence, "you once feared to speak before the world. Will you now let the world hear what love can sound like?" Her lips parted, her voice, her true voice, ringing through the chamber. "Yes." The crowd leaned forward, spellbound. He sank to one knee, not before a queen, but before the woman who had unmade and remade him. "Then let London bear witness." He drew a small velvet case from his coat. Inside gleamed a ring of simple gold, unadorned by rank or wealth. "Karina Ainsley, I ask not for forgiveness, nor for favour. I ask only that you grant me the honour of standing beside you, not as your saviour, but as your equal." The hall seemed to melt in the silence that followed. I, your ever-watchful chronicler, felt a strange sting in my eyes, surely from the candle smoke. Karina's hands trembled as she reached for him. "Derek," she whispered, her tears catching the light. "You were never my ruin. You were my reason." The Queen herself rose, her voice cool yet curious. "Well," she murmured, "this is rather more entertaining than anticipated." And though the court awaited her verdict, it was the smallest of gestures, a faint, approving nod, that sealed the matter. The orchestra resumed, timidly at first, then with triumphant chords that echoed through the marble vaults. London exhaled. Lady Maria dabbed her eyes with a lace kerchief, declaring, "It's positively Shakespearean." Lord Terence, once so smug, muttered, "I dare say survival has never looked so fashionable." The tide of favour, as fickle as it was swift, turned entirely in their direction. In a single evening, the Duke's scandal transformed into London's favourite love story. Karina stood in the centre of it all, her head high, her fingers laced with his, and if there was any tremor left in her, it was the tremor of joy long denied. When Derek kissed her hand before the assembly, no one laughed. Even envy held its tongue. Ah, dear listener, how beautifully predictable we all are. The same mouths that condemned them now sighed at their devotion, whispering, how noble, how romantic, how terribly perfect. And yet, perhaps for once, London was not wrong. For in that moment, amid music, murmurs and candlelight, the Duke of Kingswell and the woman he had once lost found not absolution, but truth. And truth, as I have learned in my endless chronicles, is rarer than virtue and far more enduring than fame. As the dance resumed and gossip softened into admiration, I set my quill to paper, smiling behind my mask. And thus, dear listener, I wrote, London gained not a perfect couple, but a truthful one. 1 year has passed, dear listener, since the night London gasped and the Duke of Kingswell turned scandal into devotion. And how swiftly this fickle city forgets. The same mouths that once spat venom now sip champagne in his honour. Such is the rhythm of society. Disgrace one season, adoration the next. The grand doors of Kingswell House are open once more, its chandeliers alight like 100 captured stars. Tonight, no rumour darkens the air, only laughter, music, and the glimmering waltz of redemption fulfilled. Guests in embroidered finery drift through the marble hall, whispering not of deceit or shame, but admiration. How radiant she looks, murmurs Lady Mireia, dabbing her eyes for the 4th time. Who would have thought the girl who fooled London could command such grace now? Her companion sighs dreamily. They say the Duchess herself planned this musicale, a woman of exquisite taste and bravery. Ah, how easily the ton crowns those it once crushed. But even I, whose quill rarely spares sentiment, must confess, the Duchess of Kingswell has earned her triumph. Karina stands before the pianoforte, bathed in candlelight, her gown the shade of dusk after rain. The ivory keys gleam beneath her fingers, steady, sure, alive. Each note she plays unfurls like forgiveness itself, tender and unashamed. Derek watches from the edge of the crowd, one hand tucked behind his back, the other holding a glass he has long forgotten to drink from. His gaze never leaves her. The woman who once pretended silence now commands every ear in the room, and every heart. The music rises, pure as the moonlight spilling through the tall windows. Guests sway, sigh, and exchange knowing glances. To them, it is a performance. To him, it is prayer. When the final note fades, a hush settles, a silence not of judgment, but awe. Then applause bursts like thunder, rippling through the hall. Karina rises, cheeks flushed, bowing with serene composure. Derek moves to her side, taking her hand as though it were still the first time he dared. "Magnificent," says Lord Terence. Yes, that Lord Terence, now all honey and hypocrisy. "To think, Your Grace, the Duchess has not only found her voice but her audience." Derek merely smiles, that quiet, knowing smile that has replaced every trace of his old arrogance. "Indeed, my lord, and London has never sounded lovelier." Later, when the crowd drifts toward supper and the orchestra begins anew, Karina slips away from the noise, seeking the cool stillness of the terrace. The night air is soft against her skin, carrying the scent of roses and rain. Derek follows, his footsteps silent behind her until she turns, already knowing he would come. "Are they gone?" she teases, her tone light but her eyes warm. He chuckles, taking her hands. "No, I believe they'll whisper about you until dawn." "They always will," she murmurs, a smile curving her lips. "But let them. I no longer mind being the subject, as long as I know who listens." His thumb traces her knuckles, reverent and sure. "And who do you wish to listen, my love?" She leans close, the candlelight from the hall catching in her eyes. "You," she whispers. "You were the only one I ever wanted to hear." For a moment neither moves. The world holds its breath, the laughter from within, the music, the gossip, all dim against the quiet rhythm of two hearts that have endured. He draws her closer, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Then may I listen to you for the rest of my life," he murmurs. Her answer is a laugh, soft as the melody she played hours ago. "If you must, my Duke." Inside, the orchestra strikes a familiar tune, the waltz that had once marked their scandal now reborn as their song. Without a word, Derek extends his hand, and there, beneath the watchful stars, they dance, alone, unjudged, utterly at peace. The terrace glows with golden light, and for once London does not intrude. And as I, Lady Whistledown, set down my quill this evening, I confess a rare and pleasant affliction, hope. Perhaps silence was never her curse, but his salvation. For in her quiet defiance, she taught him humility. In his pride undone, she found her voice. Together they rewrote what scandal had written in shame. The tongue will, of course, continue to whisper. They will say the Duke of Kingswell is softer now, that his Duchess rules him with a single glance. They will murmur of moonlit walks, of laughter in the halls once filled with sorrow. And they will be right. Because in a world where pride once damned love, these two proved that love, when honest, can redeem even the proudest soul. So, let London gossip. Let its stories twist and turn like ribbons in the wind. For once, the tale it tells is one worth repeating. Do you believe redemption rewrites every sin of pride? Whisper below, and stay tuned for my next revelation.